There comes a moment in every soul's journey when silence becomes louder than words, when the people who once felt like gravity, anchoring you, defining you, begin to feel like weight. And you don't know when it happened, only that it did. You wake up one day and realize the laughter doesn't echo the same. The inside jokes no longer land. The conversations that once felt like home now leave you searching for air. It's not about arrogance. It's not about becoming better than anyone. It's about resonance, that subtle, invisible frequency that shifts when your inner world starts to change. When you grow, something in your energy begins to move differently. You stop chasing noise and start craving depth. You begin valuing silence over small talk, peace over presence, honesty over comfort, and suddenly the same room you've always sat in, filled with the same faces, feels like a place you've outgrown. It's a quiet ache, no argument, no betrayal, no dramatic ending, just distance, a distance that grows in the spaces where words once flowed. Most people don't talk about this part of growth. They talk about success, transformation, healing, but not the loneliness that follows it, not the silent drift between souls who once swore they'd never lose each other. You start noticing it in small things, in the way they talk about others while you've stopped needing to, in how their anger still circles the same stories while yours has begun to dissolve into understanding, in how you've learned to forgive quietly, not for them, but for your own peace. And yet, you still love them. That's what makes it hurt. You love them, but the connection no longer fits. It's like trying to return to a childhood home that's been rebuilt. The walls are the same, but you're taller now. You don't blame anyone for this change. You don't even know if there's anything to blame. Growth isn't rebellion, it's revelation. And revelations often pull you away from everything that kept you comfortable. The truth is, people grow at different speeds. Some people grow through pain, others through reflection. Some never grow at all. They simply repeat. And the moment you stop repeating, you start outgrowing. There's a certain peace that begins in discomfort, a whisper that says, "You don't belong here anymore." Not because you're above anyone, but because your soul is asking for more honesty, more quiet, more alignment. You can feel it when you sit in conversations that drain you, when laughter feels forced, when your thoughts no longer fit the room. And even though part of you wants to stay, to keep pretending nothing's changed, another part of you is already walking away in silence. That's how most goodbyes begin. Not with words, but with a quiet heart that stops trying to explain itself. You start realizing that growing apart isn't failure. It's proof of movement. You've evolved past the season that birthed that connection. And now your heart aches not because it's broken, but because it's stretching. This is the unseen cost of becoming more self-aware, the natural consequence of emotional evolution. You see through things now, through excuses, through patterns, through people who keep running from their own shadows. And you can't unsee it. You can't pretend it doesn't matter. Once you've seen the truth in people, who listens to understand, who listens to reply, who truly loves without condition, you can't go back to living blind. So you stay silent, not out of indifference, but out of clarity, because you finally understand. Not everyone was meant to walk with you beyond the storm that shaped you. Some were meant only to help you survive it. This is the quiet distance you can't explain. It's not rejection, it's redirection. It's not ego, it's evolution. And one day, you'll look back and realize every person you outgrew was a version of yourself you no longer needed to be. There's a certain kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from work or responsibility. It comes from pretending to be who you no longer are, just to keep the peace. You sit in the same circles, listen to the same stories, nod at the same conversations, but something inside you has gone quiet. Not because you don't care, but because the words no longer reach you. You feel the distance even when you're surrounded by people. You smile, but it doesn't feel real. You speak, but it doesn't feel like truth. It's as if you're performing the memory of who you used to be, a version of yourself built to belong somewhere you've already left. And that's where the pain begins, in the delay between your growth and your reality. You've changed inside, but the world around you hasn't caught up yet. You start questioning yourself. Why does this feel so wrong now? Why does comfort suddenly feel suffocating? Why does silence feel more honest than conversation? It's because you've started hearing the difference between connection and attachment. Connection feeds your soul. Attachment feeds your fear of being alone. And many of the people you once called friends, you now realize you were just attached to history, to memories, to the illusion of safety. You stayed because leaving felt cruel, because loyalty was taught to you as a virtue, even when it meant betraying yourself. But the longer you stayed, the more it hurt. Not because they hurt you, but because you were abandoning yourself to stay accepted. You begin noticing how drained you feel after being around certain people, not because they're bad, but because their energy pulls you back into the version of yourself you've outgrown. They talk about the same people, the same problems, the same pain, and you nod out of habit. But your heart is somewhere else now. And yet, guilt keeps you there. The guilt of change. The guilt of no longer fitting into a life you once begged to have. You tell yourself, maybe I'm just too sensitive, or maybe I'm expecting too much. But deep down, you know, it's not that you expect too much, it's that you've learned to expect something real. The realness that doesn't demand pretending. The peace that doesn't require noise. The presence that doesn't require performance. But how do you walk away without feeling like a villain? How do you tell people you love, I can't keep shrinking to stay beside you? You don't. You can't. Because most people won't understand until they grow too. To them, your silence will look like distance. Your boundaries will look like arrogance. Your peace will look like disconnection. And that's the tragedy of growth. You'll be misunderstood by the very people you outgrew. They'll call you cold, distant, different. And they'll be right. You are different. You had to be to survive the version of you that used to tolerate what you now cannot. There's a strange pain in realizing that love isn't always enough to keep people close, that sometimes growth becomes the wedge that separates what love alone cannot hold together. You begin to see that compatibility isn't just about shared interests, it's about shared evolution. Two people can care deeply for each other and still walk in opposite directions of truth. And so, you stay for a while. You stay because you hope it's just a phase. You stay because you remember the laughter, the history, the warmth. You stay because leaving means accepting that what once felt eternal is now over. But every day you stay, a part of you fades. Your energy dims. Your voice softens into something smaller than truth. And you begin to wonder which is worse, losing them or losing yourself. Most people choose the first loss. They stay, they shrink. They adjust to an emotional cage that feels familiar. But the soul has a way of rebelling. Eventually, even your silence begins to ache. You start waking up with a quiet sadness that you can't name. Because your heart knows it's being kept somewhere it no longer belongs. There's a phrase in psychology, incongruence. It means living in a way that doesn't match your true self. And incongruence is emotional suffocation. The mind can pretend, the mouth can smile, but the body always knows. That tension in your chest when you're around certain people, that's your truth trying to breathe. That exhaustion you feel after socializing, that's your authenticity begging for solitude. That feeling that you're off, even when nothing is wrong, that's your intuition whispering, It's time to move. But movement requires courage, and courage means loss. Not everyone is ready for that, so some stay and call it loyalty. But deep down, it's fear. Fear of loneliness, of being misunderstood, of starting over. You see, the pain of staying is not just emotional, it's spiritual. Every time you deny your own growth, you disconnect from your purpose. You build a home out of habits that no longer feed you. You decorate your cage with nostalgia. And though the world applauds your consistency, your soul mourns your truth. This is why so many people feel stuck without knowing why. They've confused comfort with connection and habit with happiness. They've mistaken the familiarity of the past for the belonging of the present. And so they live in rooms where their hearts can't breathe, surrounded by people who still talk to their old selves. It's a quiet suffering, the kind that doesn't show on your face, but echoes in your thoughts when the day ends. You scroll through your phone, searching for a spark of understanding, but everything feels empty. You wonder why the world feels smaller. It's because your soul has outgrown its walls. Here's the truth. Outgrowing people is inevitable. Outgrowing yourself is growth. But staying in places you've outgrown, that's self-abandonment. And that's the real pain, not the loss of others, but the slow loss of yourself, disguised as loyalty, because you can't stay small and be free at the same time. And the moment you choose peace over people-pleasing, the world begins to rearrange itself around who you're becoming. Every bond we form is a reflection of who we were at the moment it began. Our friendships, our circles, our lovers, they mirror the emotional language we once spoke, and like languages, some we outgrow. We meet people not by accident but by alignment. When you were lost, you attracted other wanderers. When you were insecure, you bonded with those who needed validation too. When you were healing, you found the ones who carried their own quiet pain. But as you evolve, the frequency shifts. The same words sound different. The same laughter no longer carries warmth. Because it was never about the words or the laughter. It was about resonance. Psychologically, human connection is driven by familiarity. We are drawn to what feels known, even if it hurts. The mind equates familiarity with safety, and so we repeat patterns that echo our earliest experiences. That is why people who grew up around criticism often feel at home around judgment. Why those who were ignored often chase those who can't give attention freely. And why love, for many, begins as an attempt to rewrite an old wound. The people you once needed, they matched your inner script. They spoke the same emotional dialect. They understood your chaos, your doubts, your unspoken fears. And together, you survived seasons that would have broken you alone. But healing changes the script. It teaches you to recognize what once felt normal as what it truly was, a cycle. And the moment you break the cycle, you stop matching the vibration of those who remain in it. That's when the drifting begins. You start craving quieter truths. You stop chasing closure from people who can't give it. You learn that not every argument needs resolution, and not every bond needs revival, because awareness rewires your emotional gravity. You no longer orbit around guilt. You orbit around peace. To the mind, this feels like loss. To the soul, it feels like liberation. Psychologists call this process differentiation. It's the ability to hold your own identity, even in the presence of others. When you were younger, you sought belonging, often at the cost of authenticity. But growth reverses that order. You start choosing authenticity even if it costs belonging. And that's what scares people. Because once you begin thinking for yourself, you become unpredictable to those who depended on your conformity. Many relationships are built not on love, but on mutual avoidance. Two people agreeing, often unconsciously, to never outgrow each other's wounds. The friendship that survives on gossip, the partnership sustained by shared insecurity, the bond glued together by complaining. All of these depend on sameness. The moment one person heals, the balance breaks. Because healing exposes truth. It forces both people to confront whether their connection was rooted in growth or in pain. This is why people resist your transformation, not because they hate who you're becoming, but because your growth forces them to face who they're not yet ready to be. They'll say you've changed, and you have. You've started honoring the parts of yourself that used to apologize for existing. You've begun loving in ways that don't demand approval. You've learned that solitude is not punishment, it's preparation. And deep within, you sense an emerging calm, the calm of self-recognition. You used to crave being understood. Now you crave understanding yourself. You used to fear being alone. Now you fear being surrounded by what doesn't feel right. This shift is psychological, but it feels spiritual, because it's the death of the false self, the persona built from pleasing, performing, and proving. And in its place, the real self begins to breathe. But growth has a paradox. It expands you inwardly while shrinking your world outwardly. Your circle gets smaller, but your peace gets larger. Your conversations become fewer but more meaningful. Your ambitions become quieter but truer. And still, there's grief, because every new version of you requires a funeral for the old one, and for those who loved that version. We rarely talk about that kind of mourning, the mourning that comes with self-discovery, the ache of realizing you can't unlearn the truth, even if it costs you companionship. But there's also beauty in it, because the space left by those who no longer resonate is not emptiness. It's possibility. It's the silence where new connections can form, rooted not in need, but in mutual evolution. You begin to see that love is not about keeping people close. It's about allowing freedom, theirs and yours. You can love someone deeply and still release them without resentment. You can honor what was without clinging to what's gone. That's emotional maturity, to bless a memory without demanding a future. You understand now that every person you outgrew was essential. They reflected a chapter of your becoming. They taught you something your soul needed to learn: patience, forgiveness, resilience, self-worth. Without them, you wouldn't have reached this level of clarity, and so you stop labeling people as toxic or wrong. You simply accept that some energies are temporary, that not all love is meant to last, some is meant to awaken. You stop resenting endings. You start respecting timing. There's wisdom in the ebb and flow of human connection, the quiet truth that we meet each other at the level of our awareness. And when one person ascends, the path diverges. It's not rejection. It's the universe rearranging your relationships to match your next stage of consciousness. And though the process feels lonely, it's sacred, because for the first time, you're no longer building your identity around others. You're building it around truth. That's why we outgrow people we once needed, because the need was never about them. It was about what they represented: the lesson, the mirror, the comfort, the pain. And when the lesson completes, the mirror fades. You'll know it's time when peace feels more honest than explanation, when silence feels lighter than conversation, when staying feels like self-betrayal. That's not loss, that's alignment. At first, letting go feels like dying in slow motion. The silence after connection, the space where someone's voice used to echo, the empty chair that once held laughter, it all feels unbearable. But eventually, that silence stops echoing pain. It starts sounding like clarity. You realize you don't need to fill it anymore. That peace isn't found in replacing people. It's found in remembering yourself. Something subtle happens inside you. You stop reaching for your phone to share every thought. You stop rehearsing the things you wish you'd said. You stop analyzing what went wrong, and instead, you start observing your own breath. Slow, steady, enough. There's a moment when your mind stops arguing with reality. You stop wanting them to understand. You stop trying to be understood. You simply accept that what once was beautiful has completed its purpose. Acceptance isn't giving up, it's growing up. It's the moment your energy returns to you, all the attention you used to pour into maintaining what's gone. It flows back into your own becoming. You start to see your life differently. The chaos you once called normal now feels heavy. The drama that once entertained you now feels wasteful. You begin valuing stillness. You find yourself drawn to simple things. Morning light, the sound of rain, the quiet of your own company. It's not loneliness anymore, it's solitude, and there's a difference. Loneliness is the absence of others. Solitude is the presence of yourself. You begin to realize that so much of your old pain came from resisting endings. You wanted to keep everything, every person, every phase, every identity alive at once. But life isn't meant to be clung to, it's meant to be flowed through. Every ending you accept becomes a new beginning. Every release creates space for something truer, and this realization is freeing because you no longer measure love by its length, but by its sincerity. You no longer measure connection by its intensity, but by its peace. You no longer measure life by what stays, but by what teaches. You start forgiving more, not because they asked, but because you understand. You see now that everyone was doing the best they could with their level of awareness, including you. Forgiveness becomes easier when you stop expecting people to be who they cannot yet be, when you stop demanding closure from those who are still running from their own. And in that surrender, something beautiful begins to happen. You feel lighter. The heaviness you carried for years, the stories, the resentments, the what-ifs, they begin to dissolve, not through force, but through understanding. You see, holding on isn't love. Holding on is fear, fear that without them you won't recognize yourself. But you've learned now, the self you were protecting no longer exists. You've already become someone new. You begin to live differently. You stop chasing validation. You stop explaining your peace. You start moving with quiet certainty, not needing to prove that your solitude is strength. You can look back at old photos and smile without sadness. You can hear their name and feel nothing but gratitude, because they were part of the story, not the whole book. And when you look at yourself now, you realize something profound. The person you were trying to be in their eyes, you already are, just not for them to see. That's what peace feels like, not joy, not excitement, but a steady, unwavering knowing. You are where you're meant to be. People ask what healing looks like. They expect fireworks, revelations, rebirths. But healing looks like quiet mornings where you don't miss the noise. It looks like walking past the places that used to hurt and feeling only stillness. It looks like smiling at your past self and whispering, "We made it." You stop seeing endings as punishments. You start seeing them as mercies. Life's way of clearing space for your next chapter. The transformation isn't loud. It doesn't come with applause or validation. It comes with calm. And it's in that calm that you begin to rebuild, not the old connections, but your relationship with yourself. You start nurturing your curiosity again. You rediscover forgotten passions. You reconnect with silence, nature, music, art, reflection. You begin creating not to prove your worth, but to express your peace. And just when you stop looking, new people arrive, not the kind who demand, but the kind who understand, not those who feed your ego, but those who water your soul. This time, you recognize the difference instantly, because peace has given you new eyes. You see through performance, you sense authenticity, you trust your intuition more than approval. The relationships that enter your life now feel effortless. They don't drain, they flow. They don't require explanation. They resonate. You don't have to convince anyone to stay. They simply belong, and you realize it was never about finding your people. It was about finding yourself. Because once you return home to your truth, the right people recognize the frequency. You've stopped holding on, and in doing so, you've stopped losing yourself. What's left is presence. What's left is peace. The peace that doesn't need to be proven, defended, or announced. The peace that simply is. That's the transformation. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of understanding. Not the end of endings, but the ability to see beauty in them. When you stop holding on, you realize that life has always been moving. You were just resisting the current. Now you're floating, not drifting, not lost, just trusting. You finally understand what it means to grow without bitterness, to let go without regret, to love without ownership. And that's the quiet revolution of the soul, the moment when peace becomes your new gravity. There comes a day when the ache softens, not because you've forgotten, but because you've finally understood. You stand somewhere familiar, a cafe, a park bench, an old street, and realize that the world feels lighter. You're not looking over your shoulder anymore. You're not replaying the past in your head. You're simply here. You've stopped asking, why did it end? And started asking, what did it teach me? And that question changes everything. You begin to see how every loss carved space for awareness, how every silence shaped your ability to listen inwardly, how every goodbye refined your understanding of love. The loneliness that once felt unbearable now feels sacred, a temple built for your becoming. Because in that solitude, you met yourself without noise. You discovered that peace isn't something you find in others. It's something you return to within. You used to think walking alone meant failure, that it meant being forgotten, unloved, unseen. But now you see it differently. Walking alone means you no longer betray your own rhythm just to keep pace with someone else's. It means you've learned to trust your own steps, even when no one applauds them. It means you've stopped waiting for someone to give you permission to live in truth. You've stopped performing closeness. You've stopped mistaking attention for affection. You've stopped confusing company with connection. And slowly, the emptiness becomes fullness. You begin to enjoy your own thoughts again. You start talking to yourself kindly. You wake up in the morning and realize that peace doesn't need witnesses to be real. That's when life begins to bloom quietly around you. Opportunities appear not from striving, but from alignment. People cross your path not out of need, but out of resonance. And those who stay, they stay because they recognize your stillness as something rare. You don't chase them, you don't test them. You simply meet them where peace meets peace. The world teaches us to fear solitude, to fill every silence with noise, every absence with replacement. But solitude is the soil where wisdom grows. It's where you learn that not all love is meant to be held. Some love is meant to pass through you and teach you how to hold yourself. You start to see your journey differently. Every person you've outgrown becomes a prayer you once whispered. Every season you've left becomes proof that you're capable of change. And every scar you carry becomes a soft reminder that healing doesn't erase history. It redeems it. You no longer crave endless beginnings. You crave depth, truth, stillness. You crave people who speak with presence, who love without pretending, who understand silence as part of conversation. And when you find them, you recognize them instantly because they feel like peace, not excitement, like calm, not chaos, like continuation, not distraction. You smile more now, not because everything is perfect, but because you've stopped needing it to be. You trust the unfolding. You let things come and go without forcing them. and you finally see the beauty in impermanence, because what stays effortlessly was always meant to stay, and what leaves was never truly yours to hold. That's the wisdom hidden inside every loss, the understanding that nothing real can be taken and nothing unreal can stay. You realize that love isn't ownership, it's allowance, that endings aren't failures, they're directions, that growth isn't selfish, it's sacred, and somewhere in that realization, you find peace. Not the kind that needs to be protected, but the kind that protects you. So now, when someone drifts away, you bless them quietly. When the past calls, you answer with gratitude instead of guilt. When loneliness visits, you offer it tea instead of fear. You are not who you were when this began. You've become the calm you once sought in others, and that calm will carry you wherever you're meant to go next. So if this message reached you, if it found you in a moment of quiet distance, if you've been wondering why some connections feel heavy, why some rooms no longer feel like home, know this: you're not broken, you're evolving, you're not losing people, you're finding yourself. And the ones meant for the new you will recognize you without explanation. If this spoke to you, if it touched that hidden place where strength and sadness live together, share it, not for numbers, not for approval, but because someone else out there is walking this same quiet road, wondering if they're the only one. Let them know they're not. And if you want to walk a little further with me, if you want to keep reflecting, growing, and remembering what peace feels like, stay, subscribe. Not as a follower, but as a companion in this journey of awakening. Because this channel, this space, this conversation, it isn't about noise. It's about coming home to silence. It's about remembering who you are beneath everything you've had to become. And maybe, just maybe, that's why you're here. Sometimes the path to peace is simply the courage to keep walking, even when no one walks beside you.